Hey there, and welcome to your June 2020 monthly astrology overview. So if you're catching this video on YouTube, welcome. What this video actually is the first installment of a series of videos I provide every month in my Golden Circle Astrology Membership Club. So if you'd love to get more astrology insights, resources, tips, and help you learn more about astrology as the sky moves, you'll find more about that in the description below. If you're catching this video as a member of the club, welcome. It's great to have you back, and let's get straight into the astrology. So when I look at the configurations for June, I'm like, wow, it's a pretty quiet month in terms of how many planetary aspects line up. However, just because the sky is quiet doesn't mean it's not got a lot to say. So it is a big month, I'm not going to lie. We've got a few things happening. Okay, so we've got eclipses. So that's definitely probably the big thing of June. We have Venus is finally winding up her retrograde phase in Gemini. And we have the retrograde of Mercury in Cancer. And we also have the second of 3 Jupiter and Pluto conjunctions. So they're my big picks for June. So let's get into it. So June kind of begins with a bit of a heavy emphasis on Gemini. Okay, we've got the Sun, we've got the North Node, and we've got Venus there. And so what we might see as the month begins is June does have a bit of a throwback feel to the month of April. So Venus retrograde finally connects with Mars, which is something that nearly happened in April, but didn't happen. So anything that kind of showed hope or possibility for or around may start to, come back into your sphere around that time. We also have Venus is going to conjoin the Sun at the start of the week. So this is going to infuse Venus with some fiery energy. She's going to go through this process that astrologers call Cazimi. So when a planet comes into the heart of the Sun, it's forged in fire. It's a process of purging and renewal and letting go of the old and starting to move forward. So this is I guess we could call it like the depth of Venus retrograde, if you like. And from there, she's going to emerge away from the Sun and start her journey as the morning star. So just as a little bit of a sidebar there from the main influences of June that I mentioned, this is a turnaround point for your Venus retrograde story, which may mean that while you don't have all the solutions quite yet, you might have made a decision in your mind about something, and it may not be time to move forward or take action or start changing things. But the whole point of a retrograde cycle is about going within and processing things and figuring things out. And then when that connection with the Sun happens, it's like, oh, I've circled all these thoughts and feelings in my mind for long enough now. Now it's time to start, moving forward, taking action, making plans. They may not fully manifest or come about yet, but one of the hardest parts about, making change in our life is the choice or the decision to do it. We mull it over in our minds for a little while, and then we finally do it. So as the month begins, there may be this sense of finally maybe knowing what you want. Doesn't mean that anything's going to happen just yet, but just that kind of knowing, okay, I've decided I'm going to do this, or this is what I want, can sometimes almost within of itself be like hugely empowering about how you're going to move forward. So as we move into the weekend, we have our first eclipse of the Gemini Sagittarius axis. So this is a lunar eclipse, and so that means it's the full moon. So the full moon's in Sagittarius and within range of the nodes. And so when we have eclipses, the Sun has to be within range of about 18 degrees of either the north or the south node, which we have in this case. And so any lunations that happen within that time is an eclipse. So we've got the full moon in Sagittarius aligned with the nodes, aka a lunar eclipse. So what can we expect around this time? We've got the full moon in Sagittarius, so aligned with the South Node. So we're bringing in flavors or themes here of maybe letting go of some old beliefs, letting go of, or, figuring out, is this ultimately true? All these stories I've been telling myself, or these dogmas or doctrines or philosophies that I live my life by, are these true for me anymore? With the influx of all the Gemini and the Venus retrograde in Gemini and Mercury just being in Gemini, it's kind of like, all right, I've got all this new information has come through to me now. And, our challenge under this lunation is to now kind of think, well, now I've got some new info. Is this ultimately true? So this is something that we can really experience under this eclipse. And it's like, are these beliefs that I may even be really unaware of showing up? And this can be an eclipse. We've just got to clean or cleanse out some of those beliefs, or perhaps ideas, things that we do that are based on opinion as opposed to fact. So those can be some key themes there as well. And so it is the moon in Sagittarius, and so we do have some mundane things to consider from a collective perspective as well. So the moon in mundane astrology often represents the people or the public. And so this is aligned with the South Node. And so we may start to see some shifts around public gatherings, or closing down the expansion, full moon in Sagittarius, of people. Those are some things to perhaps watch for as well. Full moons that are eclipses, of course, new moons that are eclipses too, just a caveat for the next 6 weeks, because we have an eclipse that takes us through the end of the month and into July as well. This is not a great time to do any of those traditional things that we often do around lunation. So don't put your crystals out. Don't create new intentions or any type of forgiveness rituals around this time. It's really a great idea just to kind of lie low. And, the eclipse cycles are disruptions or changes in the rhythms of the natural world, I guess, of the new moon and full moon. The lunation cycles, it's like being thrown a joker in the pack of cards. So we sometimes don't really know what we're going to get with eclipses. They are definitely those maverick energies astrologically that can be sometimes difficult to predict. So with that in mind, it is really a great idea to kind of go within and kind of ride the energy out. And one of the reasons for this too is because when we have eclipses, one of the luminaries is blocked. So a lunar eclipse, the moon is blocked by the earth, and a solar eclipse is the sun's light is blocked by the moon. And so there's some feeling here from an observational perspective of what's actually in the sky, is that something is being blocked. So there's something that's not clear or not visible. And that's a very, I think, overarching theme for the month overall, is the planetary play on visibility and invisibility of light and no light. The lack of planetary aspects is, sort of makes it seem like the month is quiet, but it's the nuances in light variances and visibility and invisibility that really does kind of make it a month that there's a certain maybe like caution or carefulness or riding out your time that may be wise. So eclipse tips, meditate. If you have any type of practices or mantras or rituals that you really like to perform that don't involve kind of manifesting or things like that, that would be ideal. Salt baths, cleansing rituals. If you're into fasting or anything like that, that might be a really great period to do that, at least when the moon is active in the sign of the eclipse. So we're looking at around a 2.5 day period. That would be a good time to abstain from certain things, maybe sugars or alcohol, or just have the very bare basics, maybe like fish or vegetables and things like that. So it's a really good time to do those sorts of things if that's what you're into. I'm personally not, but that's my Taurus planets talking there. So anyway, so that is the eclipse, and that happens, let me find the details for you. So that happens at 15 degrees of Sagittarius. So if you have any points, you know, ascendant, midheaven, or any planets in this part of your chart, this is going to be a strong influence for you. So I'm just consulting a moon calendar I wrote earlier. Oh, actually, it would have been last year. Okay, so the eclipse happens on June 5, June 6, depending on your location. And the times for that are in the Eastern time zone, New York. We're looking at June 5 at 3:12 p.m. London, we're looking at June 5, 8:12 p.m. And Sydney time, the Eastern time zone in Australia, that is June 6, 5:12 a.m. So we'll wake up under the vibes of the eclipse on that day. Okay, so probably the next notable thing is to mention, I see this so often when it's eclipse season. What I see is there's often a lack of planetary aspects in between eclipses. And it's almost like some kind of divine order where we are cosmically invited to maybe not do much, or we're given a little bit of a break because we've got to process or go through these more intense energies with the eclipses. And they do tend to trigger, you know, intense vibes, intense feelings, intense shifts in the force, if you like. And what I experience too is, you know, I say this a lot to people, that the time between eclipses kind of feels like that time between Christmas and New Year, where you're not sure what day of the week it is, what you're meant to be doing. The feeling of time is often different during eclipses, as it is in Christmas and New Year too. So in the following week is we have a very quiet week. It's a very Neptunian week. We've got two aspects involving Neptune, the sun and Mars, and the moon in Pisces. So chill out, do your thing there. And then the next probably thing that's worth mentioning is Mercury stationing retrograde in the sign of Cancer. So that happens on Thursday the 18th across the board, regardless of your time zone, at 14 Cancer. So this is the second time we've had a Mercury retrograde in Cancer. We had that last year too. And this is the only Mercury retrograde of this year that is entirely contained within a water sign. So the Pisces retrograde and the upcoming Scorpio one are straddled sign boundaries. So this is I guess you could call a pure Mercury retrograde in that sense, where the sign and house that rules Cancer in your own birth chart is going to be quite under focus. So this is a difficult, I guess, energy for Mercury. If we think about Mercury and what that planet signifies, is just neutral collection of information, exchange of data, logistics, money, trade, commerce. It's just, you know, the idea of don't shoot the messenger. I'm just passing on the messenger. So Mercury has a very neutral influence in of itself. It's not male nor female or yin or yang. It's not wet nor dry or hot, not cold. So it is sort of like a very androgynous type of planet, and it takes its influences from what it's around. And there's a lot of technical astrological stuff around that I won't go into. So what's happening to it this month is that it's in the emotional realms of Cancer. And Cancer is a mute sign, so it can be a little bit tricky or difficult for Mercury to express itself or to get that message through or to be direct in its communication style. So the sign of Cancer, it is an exoskeleton. The crab is the exoskeleton, which also walks sideways. And so Mercury will tend to maybe kind of speak passive aggressively or indirectly, or say things to evoke a response or a reaction, but in a way that is kind of passive or projectory in a way. So, it's just Mercury's ability to function in of itself is kind of compromised or a little bit challenged by Mercury. And so, one sort of thing with this Mercury retrograde phase, it's kind of hard to look at it in of itself because it's very implied or implicated with the Venus in Gemini, the Venus retrograde in Gemini cycle too, because Venus retrograde in Gemini is looking to Mercury for its support and for its guidance. And, Venus is saying to Mercury, what do I do now? And so while we're looking at Cancer, Venus is really starting to think about her feelings or think about her emotions and deciding, what was kind of working for her quite well in May might be like taking a step back now, and what I agreed to in May, maybe I don't feel quite the right way about that now. So there is this sense of indirectness, or maybe a little bit of, I know what I want in terms of who Venus is, but then how do I go about communicating it? And so the fact that Mercury is retrograde too is going to make this a little bit more challenging for Venus. So there's about a 7-day period where Venus is retrograde in Gemini, Mercury is retrograde in Cancer, prior to Venus stationing direct on June 25 and June 26. So, this is going to be a time where the Venus retrograde story becomes perhaps a little bit more internalized, a little bit more emotional, a little bit more emotive. Maybe there's a part of you under the Venus Cazimi at the start of the month. Okay, I've decided I'm going to go and do this thing, or I know what I want now. Then the Mercury retrograde and Cancer component is like, well, how do I express these desires, or how do I talk to that person, whether it's a relationship or my boss or, my neighbor or whoever it is. So there's that sense of how do I go about taking the logistical steps forward or the communicational steps forward in around the Venus stuff. So, I think this is going to bring a very kind of deep, reflective, one step forward, one step back feeling around it. So it is kind of like, but one thing Mercury in Cancer is quite good at doing is kind of communicating in a way that may not always be clear, but it's caring. I'm going to tell you perhaps what's going to make you feel better, or what's going to nurture you or support you or help you. It may not be clear, but it will feel protective, or it'll feel nourishing, or it'll feel nurturing. So there is this, how do I communicate my desires, but do it in a way that maybe is, going to help people, or it's going to protect those I care about. So yeah, there's a lot of depth there with this cycle and how they align up. What you might also experience is that there's a more desire to connect with the people that you really care about. So with the, era of socialization and distancing, what I've seen come up a lot with client work is this desire to be near the people that they really care about, be near the people that they call family. And so Venus retrograde, and now looking to Mercury in Cancer, which eventually retrogrades itself, it's like, okay, how can I get back to the people that I really want to be with? How can I get back to the people that I really care about? And that might be family, it might be friends, those people who are so close to you that you call family. So that is that vibe with Mercury retrograde in Cancer. The whole Venus-Mercury combination does change in July. It's not quite as fluid or comfortable or supportive or nurturing. There's a little bit more assertiveness there. So, enjoy the feelings, do your best to communicate what you really want. And that's something that Cancer is not great at, just coming out with it. So if you can sort of practice that, or figure out what you really want to come out with as we get to the end of the month, that's going to really support you and help you a little bit as we move through into July. Okay, so many things to talk about, and I'll always talk to you about more than what I say I will in the beginning. So Okay, the most noticeable, or I should say notable thing of the month of June is hands down the solar eclipse on the solstice. So what we have happening is the new moon in Cancer. So not only do we have the sun's entrance into Cancer, which signifies the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and the winter here in the south, it's also a new moon. So that in of itself is potent, but adding to that, it's also a total solar eclipse. So for the astrologers out there, the lunation falls at 0 Cancer. The north node in Gemini is at 29. So it doesn't really get much more totality than that. And that happens on the solstice. So this is a huge feeling of turning around, a huge feeling of sliding doors. So what's happening in amidst of this eclipse is that Venus is also at her station degree. This week she does not move at all. So this is an intensification of her themes. This is an intensification of desires, of wants, of decision making, of information coming through, to do with Venusian topics. So relationships, love, the things that give us joy and pleasure and fun. And so we've also got Mercury is retrograde in Cancer. It's a little bit of a distance from the eclipse, but it's still in the same sign as it. So it has something to say. So what I am kind of interpreting this a little bit like is the sliding door moment. So we're starting, even though the nodes have moved into Gemini and Cancer, Gemini and Sag, the eclipse is in Cancer. So we're revisiting that cardinal axis that was so active up until recently. So it's like, okay, we are trying to make a clean break from the past, perhaps, but there's a need to look back. There's a need to perhaps go back, particularly with Mercury in Cancer. And Cancer is a sign that doesn't necessarily like to break away from the past. It has a sentimental element to it. I'm a Cancerian, and I will remember all those little things about you that you totally forgot. And so we do hold those kind of, sentimental thoughts. But the North Node in Gemini is suggesting push forward, go forward, new information. So there may be a need to go over some old emotional data in your mind or in your life or in your experience and really kind of figure out, maybe what can I take with me into the new beginnings, or what can I let go of as well. So this is a new moon on the solstice, a total solar eclipse. So this is so indicative of a push forward. It's huge. Okay. So if you are thinking about moving forward in some aspect of your life, processing all this Venus retrograde, what do I really want? The new moon, the solar eclipse in Cancer is an opportunity to do that. From a more global or a mundane perspective, collectively, this eclipse is going to, the shadow or the visual of it is going to go through parts of Africa, I think like Congo area, then it's going to go through like India, Pakistan, and parts of China. So that kind of Africa, Asia kind of part of the globe is going to see this eclipse or be shadowed by it. So, that's going to be parts of the world to watch out for. We may experience some really climatic changes, particularly in those areas. It's a solar eclipse in Cancer, so it might bring excess of water or extreme weather events, particularly in those parts of the world. So on the personal level, though, there is a tendency to maybe want to overdo things. We have this lunation is so tightly configured to Rahu, the North Node, that can bring a real hungry vibe. It can bring an insatiable desire there. And that can be a great thing, it drives us forward. It propels us to go forward. But of course, there's, the balance, when is too much enough. So again, look to that Cancer component of your birth chart. And this is a time where we can perhaps maybe not do the rituals, or maybe, not get too involved in the excitement of such potent new beginnings, but be aware that there's going to be some action, activity, forward momentum in this part of your own personal horoscope. So that is the month of June in a nutshell. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention was the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So this is the second aspect that kind of is that throwback to April. And so Jupiter and Pluto together in the sign of Capricorn is a very polarizing energy. And so when it happened in April, I think it was around maybe April 5 from memory, this was around the time, at least, that the Australian government was starting to offer different bailouts and support amongst the whole COVID-19 situation. And so it was like gifts from the government, Jupiter in Capricorn, Pluto, power and politics. It's like, here, let's have all the money. And now we are having this aspect again at the same degree, 24 Capricorn. However, both of these planets are retrograde this time. So it's going to have a little bit of a different energy. So I know, at least from the Australian perspective, the government wants to start reining in the handouts. They want to start reining in things. We're starting to see reports around how mismanagement of the money has been happening, and mistakes, however you want to define what those are, and also big businesses that were given a lot of money but haven't sort of done the right thing by the people, or kind of took the money and ran, sort of thing. So we are going to start to see intensification around the way wealth is distributed. We're going to start to see changes around the power, the polarizing. So over the last several months, there's been massive shifts in the movements of money, and so it's sort of like the people, the richer kind of got richer, and then the poorer kind of got poorer. So the disparity of the sharing of resources has been quite huge. And so with the retrograde influence, we may start to see, well, the things may become revealed around the things that tried to be hidden or tried to be put in under the table back in April. So those are some manifestations possibly. And this polarizing of extremes, so the extreme small versus the extreme big, or the extreme big and then the extreme small. There's no happy medium with these two planets. And so this is a huge signature for 2020 overall. And we're getting the second installment of that this month. And we will get the third and final one in November. So on the personal level, this is going to show an intensification, of course, of the area of your life governed by the sign of Capricorn. And so this might be an area where you experience, where you have to maybe go deeper, find hidden opportunities to perhaps, this is something that we've seen with so many people, that, the situations come, about globally, the pandemic, and people have had to try and find a pivot in their business, or they've had to, try and do something different in order to survive. So survival instincts have been, very heightened. So this may give you a new invite, how to perhaps dig deeper a little bit into your Capricorn chart, and how can you perhaps, or the Capricorn part of your chart, I should say, and see how you can dig deeper, or find a hidden opportunity, or take back your power around something. Or, maybe relinquish a little bit of power if you've been trying to hold on too much to something. So this is a very sort of intense vibe. I know I've used that word a couple of times now, and I guess when we're talking about Jupiter and Pluto in Capricorn, I can't think of, that's the word that I really just go to. So, this is an opportunity again to look back at April and revisit some of those themes, and how can you perhaps do things differently. So look to those Capricorn parts of your birth chart, and that is where you will find a little bit more of an influence around that part of your your life for June. So I hope that's given you a little bit of inspiration and guidance for the month ahead. Of course, if you would love more of this, do check out that golden circle link in the description notes below. And I look forward to catching you when I make the next video. Bye for now.